Hey folks, Rich Tyson with another video here, kind of in the series of kind of what's going on with the Tenant Protection Act and the moratorium on evictions and what we are facing as landlords. The first two videos I put out have really generated a ton of feedback, a lot of it heartbreaking from landlords across the state, all the way down to the 5 boroughs and up here in Western New York. So I think this is just good to keep putting information out there for maybe some of you who are just curious about the situation. Some of you other landlords that are happy to find someone else that you can identify with that's running into the same issues that you are. So as I mentioned in a previous video, I've lost a little over $60,000 this year in essentially rents that are never going to get recouped. And unfortunately, that is due to the Tenant Protection Act, which has removed most of the teeth in the recourse that we previously had. But I did get this week the bill from my attorney, who I love, and I'm not complaining about the costs of my attorney, but I just think it's interesting to point out, outside of the lost rents, kind of some of the other costs that we're facing as landlords and we're incurring. So I had 11 people that I opted to start the eviction process on. As I mentioned in a previous video, these are not people that just had a downturn in wages. I'm working with those folks and more than happy to do so. I've certainly run into rough times in my past, and I can appreciate other people doing so or being in that position themselves. But these are people that I know have had literally no downturn in wages. Some of them, majority of them, collecting SSI and SSDI. And so it's time to get them to move along now that we can open the eviction process back up, at least temporarily. Hopefully that doesn't change. So there's two notices that need to be served to tenants. One is a notice of non-receipt, because in New York State now you have to notify someone that you have not received their rent. Seems that would be something that they would know already, but good old New York wants us to serve paperwork indicating that that's the case. So between that and then the notice, the 14-day pay or vacate, which basically says, give me the money, get out in 14 days. So for those two notices to go out to the 11 folks I had, that was $1,815 at a cost of $165 a person. So thankfully, I found out in the last 24 hours that two of the folks that received those notices opted to vacate. They've relinquished tenancy, they've left the keys, and they've moved along, so I can get started on the process of getting them rentable again, repainting them, pulling carpets out. They're pretty nasty looking, unfortunately. So I'm not gonna be able to recoup any of those costs either, outside of the security deposit, which certainly doesn't come close to accounting for the amount of money it's gonna cost to get these things back up to snuff. So the good news, I guess for lack of a better term, would be that I've only got to process 9 people at this point at a cost of $300 for my attorney to go to court. Now, that's me being optimistic that she's only gonna have to go to court once per tenant. So that's an additional $2,700. So at minimum right now, I'm looking at a little over $4,500, $4,515 in attorney's fees. And that again is for the serving of the two notices and the initial court date that we will hopefully be obtaining in the next few weeks. Pardon me while I glance at my notes here. But now, kind of beyond that, right? So the process I'm anticipating is, and maybe being cautiously optimistic, is going to take about 3 months at this point. That is because it's going to take us several weeks to get a court date. Once we get to court, so long as everything goes well and the judge recognizes that this person hasn't paid in several months at that point, is likely to tell them that they've either got to pay or they've got to vacate. Now, the Tenant Protection Act took what used to be, I think, discretionary to the judge and has now made that a minimum of 14-day process. So they're going to get an additional 14 days after the court date to pay or vacate. In the event that they don't vacate or pay by that 14th day, another new mandatory time frame at minimum is 14 days to get the warrant served. So after all this time, if they still haven't figured out that they got to pay or leave, or they haven't left, I'm going to need to wait another 14 days for that marshal to come in and do the lockout on that tenant. So as I said, I'm optimistic that maybe it's going to take only about 3 months between obtaining the court date, the 14-day periods that are going to need to follow along. I doubt that any of these folks are going to come to the table and pay. And the reality of it is, outside of a judgment, there's really nothing that I can do that's going to really force them to pay. So now for that 3-month process, the least expensive rent that I have is $435 for a very small unit. So for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to use the $435 and apply that to the 9 people that I have left to work with. And that it's going to be 3 months per tenant that I'm going to lose additional above and beyond what I've already lost and what the attorney's costs are. So using the $435 times 3 months, that's $1,305 per tenant for a total of about just shy of $12,000. I've got $11,745. So the number is greater than that, probably by $1,000 or $2,000. But I guess I'm just using some easy numbers for the sake of the conversation. So what I'm looking at right now is about $4,500 in legal fees and about $12,000 or so in additional lost rents. So that puts another, 16, 17 on top of what I've already lost for, probably close to $76,000. And then that again is being cautiously optimistic, though if I were realistic, I would understand that there are going to be a number of repairs that are going to need to be done in order to turn these units and get them rentable again. So the costs keep going up, unfortunately. The recourse is basically non-existent. And I had 2 conversations this week with elected representatives within New York State's legislature. One, I think, went quite well. I think he understood, and he's on a housing committee. I think it went quite well. I think he understood that there needs to be a little more balance to this. The other person that I spoke with, and I'm going to reserve saying their names for now because I'm optimistic that maybe some additional dialogue will help, not convince them, but help enlighten them as to what is really going on out here. The other one was basically kind of the impression that the Tenant Protection Act has really nothing to do with this, failed to recognize that removing our ability for recourse and our ability to properly screen tenants is what's creating the environment where people feel empowered and emboldened to not pay rent and to kind of hang out as long as they want. So keep coming, keep sending your stories to me. Keep, kind of sending me what you're seeing out there as well, to the other landlords. I've had some really wonderful dialogue with a bunch of you across the state and want to continue to do so. The folks that are anti-landlord are very organized, and I think it's probably about time that we do a better job organizing ourselves, because this is it's quite punitive, and it's really unfortunate to see what's going on out there. And I've heard, like I said, some other horror stories, especially people downstate, folks that live in the same property that they're also renting, and they have people that aren't paying, and they're at risk of losing their primary residence because it's not only a rental property, but it's also they're occupying one of the units themselves. So I feel fortunate in the sense that these properties are strictly rental properties, and they're not also my personal home as well. But keep the stories coming in. I appreciate you guys reaching out. I'll keep putting these videos together and explaining kind of what this process looks like as I walk through it. And I welcome any feedback. You guys have a great weekend.